So I started teaching just to kind of put a couple reference points in. So I taught my very first class in 1986 that I had a full responsibility for teaching, so I'm rolling up a little bit over 30 years of teaching. Primarily, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. In fact, I might be the only industrial organizational psychologist that works in family medicine and the School of Medicine to help physicians to be better teachers, which is what my task is right now. Across those years, I have taught classes of 200 is the largest class I've taught. So if we have a conversation and somebody says I have 1,000 students, I've never taught a class of 1,000. Once you hit over 150 to 200, things start to look fairly similar. I've taught a lot of classes with 5 and 6 students, so practiced and played around with a lot of things with small group teaching. In my realm getting to UNC-Chapel Hill, I've taught at community colleges and small liberal arts colleges, and each time I've tried to take a real systematic approach to it in terms of what's happening and kind of just how to move forward. Couple other quick things. I've had the privilege, and it was a phenomenal opportunity. I've been to the Gates Foundation 3 times in the last year to talk to them about teaching and learning. Here's an we're taping this, aren't we? It was a great experience. I enjoyed it. I can say this part. I think this is totally fair. See, the phone call came because the Gates Foundation provides lots of opportunities and resources for students to be successful, especially students who are struggling, underrepresented groups, different things, but students to be successful. What they figured out fairly recently is that of all of the stuff that's out there, think for a moment of what you have available. Let me try this one. Think about what you have available for students who are struggling or to make sure students are successful. So what are like 3 or 4 things you have here at Berkeley? A student learning center? What else you got? How do you help students to be successful? Which? Peer mentors. This is good.
Office hours.
Teaching assistants, office hours. You probably have a writing center, right? Yes. You have a faculty development center too, a teaching learning center. You know what Gates has figured out just recently? Of all of the things that can help a student to be successful, good teaching comes into play too. This is strange stuff. But it hasn't been a focal point for years. And so I also got to work a little bit with ACE, American Council on independently have come up with the same conclusion. So those two entities are starting now to look very seriously at how teaching is done as a mechanism by which students can be successful, which does create an interesting scenario. It means we were off the radar for a long time. So now we're there. So playing around with this stuff. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to play around with a couple of those things, and I guess that's enough for me. Let's just keep moving here. Okay, I wanted to start with this. It's one of my favorite little illusions. You see block A and block B? Block A and block B up there, and this is good, but the sides are actually better resolution too. Block A and block B, not the letters, but the actual colors of the blocks. How many of you look up there and think that they look exactly the same shade of gray? All right, how many think they look different shades of gray? Anybody who's morally opposed to raising your hand? All right, just a couple, that's good. All right, so pretty much everybody sees them as different colors. It turns out that those two blocks are exactly the same shade of gray. But it's an illusion, which is why this does this thing. So all I've done is put blocks, black boxes over the top. This is the exact same slide. I haven't touched this slide. I overlaid this block, and then this block, and then that one, and then that one, and then that one. That's kind of bizarre. So what happens, of course, is that your brain is tricked by this. But have you ever noticed like a ding in your car and you go tell a significant other, hey, there's a door ding in my car, and the significant other says, oh, that's been there for like a week. And you say, I haven't noticed it. And you may have missed it for a week, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. It could be the same for a stain in the carpet, a pattern on the wall, whatever. Is once you see something, it's like there. So the question now is, do you think if I take the black boxes away, is your brain now going to see 2 colors of gray the way it was originally? Or now that you've seen it, are you going to not unsee it and you'll see it through your perception as the same color of gray? So here's what I want you to do. Just turn to your neighbor real quickly and say, do you think it'll go back the way it was and look different? Or do you think now it's 2 similar grades, this way it's going to stay? You got 10 seconds. Same or different? All right, I said it was like 10, 15 seconds. We're going to do this really fast. So how many of you have tried it real quickly? How many of you think it's going to go back to the way it was? Raise your hand. How many think your brain's going to see it in a new way now? Oh, just 1 or 2 people. That's amazing. So you've got a couple of people that say it's going to basically go It's going to stay the way it is. The rest of you think it's going to go back. Turns out that for most populations, it's about a 70-30 split. Most people think it's going to go back. Usually it's closer to 30% think it's going to stay the same. Well, that's fascinating. All right, so moving on. Do you care?
Yes.
Why? Why do you care? Isn't this great? There's a couple of reasons I've already shown you this. Number one is I want to demonstrate to you there's a lot of things that go on in our brains and we don't actually know what's going on. We don't think about it. I find it fascinating that you can actually go to a dinner party and get introduced to somebody and you remember their name and you never forget it. You see them again weeks later, you remember it. Somebody says, hey, was so-so in the party? You say, yeah, I talked to that person. And there's other people that you get introduced to, and by the end of the sentence, that your introduction sentence, you're already smirking because you've forgotten their name. Hi, my name is Todd. I work at UNC-Chapel Hill. I'm an industrial psychologist. And you're thinking, what was your name? But you know what's fascinating about that from a cognitive perspective is why certain names are right there and others are not. If you've ever parked your car and been able to find it, which is what most of you do all the time, becomes amazing because you don't actually study it. It's an implicit learning. You park your car, you walk away, you go back and you get in your car. But if you've ever gone to a mall during holiday shopping season, gone into a mall and come out an hour later and thought, oh dang, I do not remember where my car is. Something happened that's different. So the point I'm trying to make real quickly here is that sometimes learning is effortless and goes in really, really easy, and other times it goes in really, really hard. But oftentimes we don't know why it's doing what it's doing. Kind of like the illusions. We just see things that we don't know. So part of what I wanted to show you the illusion was for that reason. The other thing I wanted to show you is I did in anticipation. What happened is you formulated hypotheses, right? And when you formulate a hypothesis, we like to know if we're right or not. Some of you do. By the way, I'm going to point out something else. I'm going to do lots of these little side notes, so hang on if you really like linear things. It's a little tricky at times. My daughter one time while she was studying, I was working on a book, and she looked up, she was doing biology, so I'm just going to tell you up front it was biology. She looked up and she says, Daddy, I wish I was more like you. I thought, that's kind of cool. I imagine a lot of people do. She said, Daddy, I wish I was more like you. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she says, you care about stuff. And I said, whoa, this is like depression. I mean, you don't care about stuff? She says, not stuff like biology. This stuff is awful. She says, but you know what's different about you? Everything fascinates you. Like you go into a museum, I can't get you out of, I hate to go to museums with you because you'll never leave. I bet you anything, if we all together walked into a museum, even stuff you're not intimately involved with or very, very passionate about, we would all be in that room for a long period of time. There's a whole population of folks out there who would not. If it doesn't pertain to exactly what they're interested in, they don't have this underlining, I need to know stuff. And so that's the difference. I just wanted to point that out because we have differences amongst us, which is going to come back up in a few seconds. So back to this thing. If we create hypotheses, we want to know what they are. I've spent so many years teaching my psych classes saying, here's a finding, here's what everybody found, and I could lecture right straight through it. The first thing I'm talking about dynamic lecturing in here, number one, I've already done it. I've told a couple stories. I did an introduction. I'm now telling you about dynamic lecturing kinds of stuff. But if you create the hypothesis in your students, then they want to know. I've had students who actually refuse to leave class when I've said, we've run out of time, I'll show you on Wednesday. No, it'll only take a few minutes, do it now. That's very different from just giving them the information. So by the way, this is what it looks like. Bam. How many of you did it go right back to where it was before? And does anybody see two shades of gray that look identical or very, very similar? Nope. So it does tend to go back. It's because of where the light comes, right? The light comes from over here is what the perception is. That puts B in a shadow. A is not in a shadow. A is also surrounded by white blocks. B is surrounded by gray blocks. You got a contrast effect. You got a shadow effect. It's an overpowering image. By the way, because of the way your brain works, we have shape constancy. We have color constancy. We have light constancy. Watch, here's a magic trick for you. See my gray in my jacket? Darker gray, lighter gray. Darker, lighter. It's like a magic trick that's really bad. Your brain doesn't see the shifting colors of gray because your world would be bizarre if every time the light source changed, the perception of what was reality changed. So your brain is just overwhelming there. But a lot of times we don't know those things are going on. I think the same thing is true for teaching and learning. Oh, I forgot to introduce my list over here. Richard, you can be the one who's the spotter. The first hand that goes up when you hear me say any one of these 3 words is going to get a free book. Now you sat up straight. I like that. Oh, the 3 words. Wait a minute. Yours. I felt like that was a little Berkeley UNC challenge there. As soon as I start reading words, all your hands go up. Well, we haven't started yet, so when I say go, we'll start. And when I say go, it's metacognition, passive, and buzz groups. As soon as you hear that, the first hand that goes up, then you get a copy of the book. You're also, and it's not the first hand that goes up. It's the first hand Richard notices going up. Because I had to say this once because I had 2 faculty members getting an all-out fight. I mean, I actually ended up giving them $20 and said, here, go buy the book. Just back it down a little bit. Because she was adamant that her hand was up before his hand was up. But the person who was looking, don't get started. So it's not. All right. Yes, you can. And by the way, anywhere through here, just ask questions.
On the hypothesis we formed behind that we want to see it resolved.
Yes.
If we hadn't done the talking to each other,
perfect.
would we have the same reaction?
I'm so glad you said that. And by the way, so yes, anywhere through here, if you want a clarifying point, just ask it. I'm totally cool with going in whatever direction we end up going in. As long as we use the time wisely, I don't care where it ends up here. So, number 1, yes. Basically what we find, there's lots of stuff out there. If you don't have the question between the students, you tend not to see as strong of an effect. You will still get an effect, but it's not going to be as strong because now there's a commitment. Publicly, I have stated to somebody, I think it's this, and then we've had a conversation about it. And actually, if you put it into a little bit larger groups and make it a more ambiguous kind of thing, the more there's a commitment to it, the stronger that's going to be.
I would think it would also be the case that the talking with each other, and we actually thought about the question.
Well, there is that other part too, which, I'd love to say, and people will go to workshops, you read stuff. Teaching is massively hard. Ain't nothing easy about it. We talked about it a little bit earlier today, is people say, well, it's not brain science or brain surgery. It's so much harder than brain surgery because brain surgeons get to work with one brain at a time. We have whole rooms of them. Imagine how much easier our jobs would be if we had one person at a time. So here's the delicate part of this one, is that yes, there's going to be disengagement in the classroom, and the one thing that's going to happen is anytime you use an engaged learning technique, if it's done well, it's going to engage the person, which is going to draw the attention. If you don't have attention, you can't have learning. So it does focus and orient a person. So if I happen to be on my phone and somebody says, so what do you think it is? And I say, what? The 2 colors. Oh, they look like grays to me, but they're different. Yeah. Are they the same or different? And then you say, oh, well, this is what I think it is. Now you've drawn me in. So yes, anything like that draws a person in. Whew. Awareness is another one that I'll throw in there because of this one quickly too. It's easy to kind of get frustrated with students for not paying attention. Sometimes it's their fault and sometimes it's not. And so what we've got sometimes is their brains will go someplace, but your brains are wired to look for the most interesting thing around because it's very helpful. We do have to work at it, and the students need to work at it. I'm not letting them off the hook. I sometimes have to really work to pay attention when someone's talking to me. A student could be asking me a question, and I'm not really excited about the topic, and my brain can start to wander too. So we all have to work at it. But we are wired that it's very difficult at times. And so the point there is it can draw it in. So yes, definitely can happen. Now, a lot of this stuff is going to be because of bar and tag. Mid-90s was a big shift in education. That was when the whole concept was we need to start moving from teaching to learning, a focus on teaching versus a focus on learning. Focus on teaching looks like today I'm going to cover chapter 7. And a focus on learning is by the end of today, my students are going to understand distribution of sample means. Over here, my job is done as soon as I convey the information, put it out there. Over here, my job is done when I know that you've learned it. These are 2 totally different jobs. And with that shift, there's a shift in responsibility, and it makes it kind of difficult. But the point is, there was a shift that happened. So I'm going to come back to that in a second, too. I'm going to weave all those in. That's the intro. Now, we need to think about examples of different things. Well, all I said was example of different things. I didn't say the word passive at all. Okay, that's how mean I'm going to be about the whole thing, by the way. All right, there you go. This is good. All right, good. All right, passive versus active learning. So what are some things? Sorry, one time and we're done. All right, we got to move to the next word. That's a good point. I didn't actually put that as a rule, did I? All right, I'll put it back. It's still metacognition. I just got bored. My brain what happened there? Oh, man, this is fabulous. All right. See, I got to get rid of these pretty quickly. You know why? Yes, it is, isn't it? Do you notice what's happening right now? You're more focused on these three words and trying to figure out if I've said these three words than you are about what the overall message is going to be. So if I don't get rid of these three words pretty quickly, you'll actually spend most of the time just waiting for those words. I throw that out there because there's all kinds of cool things you can do in the classroom to get the students excited, and if you're not careful, it will totally distract them from learning. I made a terrible mistake one time of having students do presentations, and I said, I'm going to time them, and whoever comes closest to 2 minutes without going over is going to win a prize. Yep, total waste of a class period. Absolutely waste of a class period. Because all anybody cared about was how close they came to 2 minutes. There was cheering, people would jump up, they were yelling and screaming, 1 minute, 57 seconds, beat that. And at the end of the class session, I realized nobody was paying attention to any of the content of the presentations being given. I created a very active classroom with very little learning outcomes. I did it again. I'm trying to do the things today that I will do to illustrate the points we've got. And so I'll get rid of the last word, but not quite yet. All right, couple of examples of passive learning. So what do you think? Yes?
I would say, I was raising my hand because I used a buzzword.
I love that. That's good. All right, you think about it for a second.
Listening and then re-listening and then re-listening to the lecture.
Actually, if we're just listening and listening, we don't act it, we just listen all the time. So that's a good one. Other types, yes?
Practicing what you learn outside of class.
So wait a minute, what does that mean?
I mean, I call it immersion learning. So I
Oh.
teach students to basically leave the classroom with what they've learned in class and try to apply it to their
That feels kind of active though, doesn't it? Is that passive? I think that'd be more active. I think just passive, where you're just sitting back. Yes, sir.
reading the book.
Yeah, reading the book, watching a movie.
Regurgitating what you've heard on the test.
Just regurgitating. Of course, when you start regurgitating, that's kind of... So here's the deal. I wanted you to throw a couple things out there. Here's the question I have. Is physiologically, is it even possible to have passive learning? See, all learning is an active process. The moment you learn something, you got neurons firing, there has to be some activity there. So yes, I've trapped you a little bit on this one. It's something I like to do. But the concept here is all learning is kind of an active process. So what do we really mean by passive learning? Because there's a phrase out there, you can't learn passively, which actually I think is true. If you're passively disengaged with something, you're not going to have learning, but we've confused something. We said, if students just sit there and you talk at them, that's a passive role, which it is a passive role, but that doesn't mean it's passive learning. So we're kind of confusing some terms here. Yes?
But I think so students can download the webcasts of our courses.
Yes.
And then they will put them on their pods and they'll listen to them as they run.
Yes.
That to me is very passive, and that's very different than going over their notes and thinking about their notes.
So I want to make a slight shift here. Yes, go right ahead.
The other thing I've read is that if students take notes with a pen and paper, it's a more active way of learning the material than if you're typing on the screen.
So this is fascinating. So I'm going to slow down and do a couple of these because I just can't not do it. So yes, the research actually just came out too. Typing notes versus handwriting notes. Handwriting notes tends to lead to better recall of information than typing. I don't think it's an active passive thing. I think it's a speed of actually recording. I think what happens here is that when I type, I can type 80 to 90 words a minute. If you're talking, I can almost transcribe what you say. If I'm handwriting, I can't hit anywhere near there. I'm probably 30, maybe 30 words a minute. So when I'm handwriting stuff, I have to paraphrase it and jot down what I'm hearing. If I'm typing, I can basically type out what you're saying. We've known from transcriptionists long ago that doesn't mean they've learned anything, they just get it down. So the concept of handwriting versus laptop has to have a controlled variable in there. We have to see how much they're actually typing out. If we teach people how to type, or how to record only the overarching concepts instead of verbatim every word, that effect might wash out. So it's a really interesting concept of what's really going on there. I believe that that's the problem with typing notes. But it means that if we don't tell our students, if you're typing the notes, there's research out there that suggests that you might type an entire lecture, you might type the whole conversation here and not remember a single word of it. Type out summaries, type out keywords, type out those things. And what we're doing is trying to teach them to take notes like they would as if they were writing. Now, the study hasn't been done yet, but as soon as one of you gets a few minutes, run that thing with a controlled variable. You on it? All right. Call me in a couple months. And I think that we're going to find that that's going to wash. Yes? Excellent. So I like this. So I'm going to stop here. Well, let's go with these real quickly. Yes?
So I oftentimes talk about return of investment.
Uh-huh.
Because different study approaches have a higher return of investment.
Yes. Yep. And Dunlosky has done a really good article. I don't know if you've seen this. It's 10 study tragedies. That was a good one. 10 study strategies, not tragedies. And the concept there was which ones work and don't work. And the least effective strategies, by the way, was rereading and highlighting. And when I talk to student groups, say, hey, here's 10 strategies. Which 2 do you think are not effective? And the students, and I'm talking 15, 20 different schools over the last year, students will say highlighting and rereading not effective. I'll say, really? Cool. How many of you highlight? All their hands go up. How many of you reread? All their hands go up. Say, why are you highlighting and rereading if you know that highlighting and rereading are not effective? I said, well, you know, what else would we do? Yeah, so that's what we teach in the alternatives too. That's a good one. And one last comment here.
Well, I was going to say, are you going to eventually define passive learning?
I'm going to do my best right now. You want? Here it is. I think it's all about the pictures. See, passive learning has these awful photos. We're just pouring knowledge in. Students are all bored in the classes. They sleep during these old boring movies, and they don't like reading. I think what we've done is we've created the verbiage that I'm not comfortable with right now. We've conflated some terms. I think there's times when students are disengaged, and they're disengaged for a lot of the reasons that you just said. But disengagement's different from one-way communication. The real question is, can you learn from one-way communication? Which some folks will say no, but I think that's because they've read about the passive learning stuff. Can't learn from lecture, can't learn, someone mentioned the book. Books, really? Seriously? Think about that for a minute. If I outright lecture to you, and someone says, oh, you can't learn from lectures because it's passive, if we transcribed my lecture and handed it to you, it wouldn't make it more active. If we videotaped it and had you watch it, it wouldn't make it more active. But you're on a real slippery slope to start talking about books and movies and videos not being effective, and yet they are. I mean, I watched Schindler's List, and I'm sure there was a message in there, but it was passive learning, so I didn't get it. Right? I read Moby Dick, and I'm sure there was a message in there, but that's all just one-way communication. You can't learn from that. I watched a TED Talk once. Said, oh, that's one-way communication. You can't learn from TED Talks. So the point is, I think we have to be careful with the verbiage, and we need better pictures. Remember the poor kid in the middle? Now this is see, reading is active. So the point here is, there has to be something different than the concept of it being reading or being a lecture. Here's one for you, studies. I'll give you a book for this one. Anybody know what the studies say for data collected to demonstrate the average attention span of a student in a class, a lecture hall? Yes, sir. 10 minutes is a good answer. 7, 3, 2, 5. 90 seconds. Hey, the pessimists are up front. So, yes. 17 seconds? Oh, 17 minutes. Thank you. I was hoping you'd go. That's what I was thinking. You're getting closer and closer to it. It's the percent. Yeah, so we got numbers here from anywhere from 90 seconds. Best answer I've ever heard was minus 30 seconds. You know, I'm on my, hey, where are you going, Todd? I'm going to Dr. Jones's class. Oh, that's the lecture one. I hate that class. See, there, minus 30 seconds. I'm already bored. Before I move on, let's try something else just for the heck of it. I already mentioned movies and books and stuff. Not whether students will read or not, that's another discussion. They pick up a book, an average student picks up a book and starts far into reading before they get bored. Now I want to ask you a different question. Depends on the book, but what would it depend on?
The interest.
Comprehension?
And whether they have an assignment that directs their mind.
Yeah, whether they have assignment,
Yeah, the motivation.
interesting, maybe you're required to read it. Here's one for you. I've asked that question all over this country and actually all over my own campus at UNC and 5 other countries. Why did that just happen? I asked you how long before the average student got bored in a classroom, and you had numbers all over the place. I asked you how long before they get bored reading a book, and immediately you said depends on the book. Isn't that weird? Always happens, every time. Nobody says, wait a minute, what kind of lecture? Are they interested in the lecture? Do they have a comprehension of it? Are they required to be there? You're talking about different types of lectures for the boredom. We all just say, oh, it's 30 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes. By the way, for those of you waiting to see if you came close enough to win the book, I haven't found anybody who's collected data that I feel comfortable with to say the average person, because the research question doesn't feel like it's even testable to me. It feels like an untestable thing because, number one, you got all kinds of different teachers, all kinds of different classes, all kinds of different materials, all kinds of stuff. Here's something for you. Watch this. Classical conditioning. I love classical conditioning. I got to come back here. There we go. Stopwatch. So classical conditioning, you have an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, naturally occurring phenomenon. Might be something like a loud noise and then a jerking motion. If you take an unconditioned stimulus and you pair it with a neutral stimulus, the neutral stimulus will come to elicit a response that's similar to, but not identical to, the unconditioned response. What's truly fascinating is you now can take a new neutral stimulus, pair it with the previously neutral stimulus that became a conditioned stimulus, and this new neutral stimulus will come to elicit a response that's similar to in quality, but not in magnitude, to the conditioned response, and even to the unconditioned response. I'm going to stop there. Feel just a little bored? That was 47 seconds. Wow. And most of you, I had lost 20 seconds prior for interest levels. Now, some of you were on the edge of your seat saying, ooh, I wonder what's next. How many were in just like really having a good time with that one? All right, you are some total nerds. All right, so when we start to say the average lecture, suppose I come out and do this little game. I don't know if this will help or not. Getting ready to sell a house. Ooh, you're going to sell your house. What's one thing that can help you with an open house when people are coming to your house to sell that house?
Staging.
To do what?
Staging.
Staging. So what do you... And plants in the front, stage it. What else? Oh, look at several people said baking cookies. Why would you ever bake cookies? The smell. Do you think we have always responded well to smells of cookies? I'm going to argue that we didn't. When you were like 2 days old and you smelled cookies, my guess is you didn't think, ooh, I like that smell. I think probably what happened was through your life, somebody baked cookies in a house where you felt loved, and you found out you love cookies too, but there's an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response. Let's go with the cookie itself. You bite into a cookie, you get a sensation you really like. You have certain levels of fats and sugars that if you bite into them and they're put together right, you think, woo, I like that a lot. That is unconditioned. It just happens. You take that and put it with the smell of a cookie. A previously neutral stimulus, because you didn't have to smell it, you had to bite into it to get that response. Now you've got a neutral stimulus paired with that taste, and the smell alone can give you that feeling of, ooh, I like that. Now you take a whole nother neutral stimulus, a house. That house is paired with the smell, which was previously neutral, and now suddenly the house makes you go, whew, I don't know why, but I like this. You get a response that's similar to the unconditioned response, and yet it's never been paired with the unconditioned stimulus. We live our lives with classical conditioning affecting us all the time. That was 1 minute and 40. Almost 3 times as long, 45 seconds, 90 seconds, 2.5 times, sorry, I want to be careful with the numbers here, 2.5 times longer than the original one, and yet you probably, how many of you thought that one was a little more interesting? Yes? Okay, thank you. How many didn't find it more interesting? Get this, the nerd. I use that term very affectionately because I've always considered myself a nerd, and have you embraced the nerdness? I think you got to. All right, so here's the deal. Average amount of time a student gets bored. For a book, it depends on lots of factors. For a lecture, it's going to depend on a lot of factors. And so when you hear somebody say, oh, you know, students, they're going to get bored after like 5 minutes, say, under what conditions? You know, you can't learn from passive learning. Yeah, what exactly do you mean by that? Do you mean one-way communication? Because if you mean one-way communication, I don't know. It's a little bit warm in here, isn't it? Can we turn the heat up a little bit? Oh, you don't need it. So I think all learning is an active process. You can be in a passive role, and if you're a passive role or disengaged, we're going to lose you. So we have to figure out how not to do that. So is active learning more effective than lecturing? Here's another phrase. Anybody hear that phrase before? Raise your hand if you've heard that active learning is more effective. Oh, yay, good. I'm just going to tell you real quickly before we go down this path. I think it's just about as untestable of a hypothesis as the previous one. I don't even know what this means. So here's what I'm going to say. In the amount of time we have remaining, I am hopefully going to convince you that if somebody ever does say this to you, you get to look right at them and say, number one, I'd like to have a study that you show me that demonstrates this. Number two is, what do you mean by this? I'll fix this sentence a little bit that I think at least approximates what the data really shows. I think that active, engaged learning is more effective than lecturing all the time. I think when you add some kind of engagement with lecture, you get better than lecture alone. But we have a problem, and there's lots of good stuff out there, that if we do actually if we have a 10-minute block of time, there are times when a lecture will greatly outperform an activity for that block of time. So now I'm going to play around with a different thing. What is it that makes it not effective? So I'm going to go this route. I don't think we can say generally that lecturing is effective or not effective. I think we can say certain types of lectures under certain circumstances are not effective. I think we can say the exact same thing about these so-called active learning things like buzz groups. And I saw that one. You knew that was coming, didn't you? Oh, it was that close. It was the other way around? Oh, it's in front of Mike. I thought you had it, dude. I should give you one. Should I? You know, I could give it to you, but then we are in the midst of a trophy generation. You know, not everybody should get a trophy. Okay, so. See, we can use the phrases, but it hurts when it hits home. All right, so here's what we do. I'll get you a chance to win one in a second. Okay, coming back to this. Lecturing's been around a really, 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 really long time, about 1,000 years from what we can tell. And it hasn't changed a whole lot. If you have no internet and no readily availability of books, you got somebody who's got information who's going to read it so they don't forget it. Some people are going to write it down. And just like 1,000 years ago, that's an image from 1,000 years ago, it's pretty similar. You got your really eager people sit up front. You got your TAs over here. You get the dude side talking back there. I didn't mean to pick on you, but it was perfect timing. You, of course, got the person sleeping. We don't have that, it is warm in here. And I can't explain this, but you also, you got the dude texting. So, but if you look at today's classrooms, they look a little like this. But it's led a lot of people to say, you see, lecturing is awful. Look at the person who's back here sleeping and this person sleeping in the side conversations. But here's the part it hit me one day when I was watching this, and someone was doing a presentation talking about how awful lectures were. I thought, wow, but what about these people? What about the people who sit there and absolutely love it? Whew. So I've tried to show some things already. While I'm presenting, I'm trying to add lots of things that do the dynamic lecturing kinds of things. I'll summarize when we get to the end. We know that storytelling is effective. I've done that a couple times. We know that creating hypotheses and testing those is effective. I've done that. I've moved around, and there's lots of good reasons why moving around helps. You notice when I did the boring lecture, I stood here and did not move. We know that physiologically, when something doesn't move, it loses value in our old processing system. The point is, I'm playing around with a lot of those different areas. We want to be a little bit careful. There's another thing that's been bothering me lately. I've had a daughter. I got a daughter at Chapel Hill who's a senior now. She's got Asperger's pretty bad. Well, she used to. It's not in DSM anymore, so I told her it's gone. So that's good news. I said, hey, remember that Asperger's you had? DSM has taken it out, so you're cured. Shouldn't call it cured even. You now can look at things like the neurotypicals do. So here's the deal. She came home and started explaining. One of her favorite classes is a faculty member who lectures literally all the time. And I said, well, why is it that you like this person who lectures all the time? She said, he's absolutely fascinating. He asks rhetorical questions, and if you answer them, he yells at you. He is a person who lectures. But she says, it's like going to the movie every time I'm in the class. He weaves a story. He makes me think about stuff. She's a philosophy major. She said, I absolutely love that class. In the same class, I said, what do the other students think? She said, well, there's several other who really like it too, and a lot of them sleep. So there's other students in the class who are sleeping during that same time. So what we have to be a little bit careful of is when we start to say, look, people are side talking and sleeping, so we shouldn't do it. It's really taking away the people who are learning from a different modality. The same as if we do all active learning. So here's one quick one for you. Suppose I have a class and I do active learning exercises all the time. Who do I disadvantage? There's somebody I disadvantage. Who?
Person who may be physically disabled.
All right.
You can't move around.
So if a person is able to restructure a little bit, so I like the concept. Yes?
Your daughter who formerly had Asperger's?
My daughter formerly, in fact, I should refer to it that way too. I like that. My daughter formerly with Asperger's, because of why though?
She can't socialize as easily with other people.
Excellent. After class, you know her most common response? Guess what it is? Exhaustion. I heard it over here. She is exhausted after class because interacting with humans is exhausting. It is for introverts as well. Anybody in here who's introverted for just a second, you don't even need to raise your hand. I won't out you. But if you want to, it's fine. Let's try this one. Suppose you have 3 classes, a 9 to 10 class, a 10 to 11 class, and then a 12 to 1 class. Your 9 to 10, they break you up and do exercises all over the place. To 10 to 11, we break you up and do exercises all over the place. And in your 1 o'clock class, you got an exam. So what do you do from 11 until 1? You're pure introvert who just sat through 2 different classes with total active learning stuff. What happens next? You need a nap. It's exhausting, right? So now we've got individuals, even if they don't nap, if they go and study, they're studying exhausted. Mentally, they are fatigued. So we do have to be careful. Now, I'm not standing up here and saying, ooh, you don't want to do active learning because you're hurting the people with introversion. That's not always true. And you do need to be pushed if you got introversion because you need to be pushed to do things. The point I'm saying is, anytime somebody comes along and says, we shouldn't do this, we should do that, I think in our heads we should say, for whom? For whom does this help and for whom does this not help? And I'm really hesitant to even do this at times because it's pretty overwhelming to think, okay, I'm going to try teaching my class like this. I wonder who I'm hurting today. That's not the gig. What we're trying to do is spread it out and do it different ways. And so if we're teaching in different ways and we're bringing in different strategies, I'm going to lecture for 15 minutes, then we do an activity that has a really good purpose behind it, then we're going to do a short lecture, and then we're going to have some free discussion. I've given the introverts a chance to have a break. I've given the people who like lecture a chance to listen to that, but I've had the people who need to have activity do that. So we mixed it up. Yes, sir.
So what you're saying, by implication, is there really is nothing that's more or less universally effective?
I have not seen anything right now that is going to be effective for everything in every situation. If anybody knows it, you can jump in here real quickly or send me the article. Because, of course, we're dealing with tons of variability. You know what really hurts? Here, we're taping it, right? You know what hurts? You know what really hurts the educational process? Diversity. I wanted to be one of those people that's going to be on TV. Ooh, no, it's not going to work. Okay, so here's the deal. Diversity with respect to certain things. We certainly want diversity of opinion. We certainly want diversity of experiences. We want a lot of those things. We need those things. But when it comes to diversity like knowledge of a certain topic, for instance, when I taught statistics and one of my students came up and said, hey, Dr. Z, first day of class, could you show me how to divide on a calculator? Statistics has a prereq of algebra. I'm surprised that she never had in algebra or any mathematical process beforehand. I tried to be inclusive enough to say, well, it depends. What she might have been confused on is the reverse function calculators, right? Sometimes it's 9 divide 7 equals, sometimes it's 7 divide 9 equals. So I said to her, and some of you can start snickering right now, I said, well, you know what? It depends on your calculator, but if the numerator is larger than the denominator, your answer is going to be larger than 1. And if it's not, then just flip it around. Whoa, slow down, dude. Did she want to know what a numerator was and what a denominator was? That's diversity, heterogeneity of a certain foundational concept that was needed in class. So the reason I bring this up is that we do have lots of different experiences, which is all good, but it means we have to be very careful what kinds of examples we use. Because if I use an example like sometimes all a class needs is more cowbell. A couple people laughed. So just the brave people in here, who doesn't have a clue what cowbell, see how I see some head shaking, and what is it all about? What was the reference to? Will Ferrell and Seinfeld, right? Not Seinfeld. Will Ferrell and Saturday Night Live, SNL. Sometimes the point is I can use something like that. I think it's funny. I think you'll find it funny. I hear a couple people laughing. But I have given an example that not only doesn't help certain people, but it makes them confused like, oh man, I suppose I better know cowbell for the exam. So now they don't even know. So the point is there's so much variability in there. I don't know what the universal principle would be. But what we can do is keep mixing things up and keep pushing in that direction. All right. Yes, go ahead.
So when you use different activities and engage different students,
Yes.
the problem is that at least for me, I don't have these exams are usually going to benefit some of that material, not the other. So I can't do different, it'd be wonderful, but usually different activities don't have the same learning objective.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to do. So from what I'm hearing you're saying is that you're not getting, you might be doing an activity that might have some benefit to it, but it's not going to get them the right answer on the test?
Well, let's say your lecture and your active learning are not the same, about the same thing. They're about different things.
Okay. But they don't have to be, right?
But usually they are going to be somewhat different in their focus.
Yeah, but that's what I'm going to say. I don't know that they have to be. I think what they can do is if you get the focus right, what I can do is set up an engaged learning strategy that's going to hit the same type of thing. So I could tell you about sunk cost. I could also come up with a problem and have you work through a problem to get to sunk cost. I could actually have you build some kind of a model to demonstrate it. I mean, there's different things I could do, but as long as I keep sunk cost, knowledge of how it operates as the outcome, then essentially it's going to get there. Now, things are going to take longer. Discovery learning is a massively time-consuming gig. And by the way, anybody who says, I love to use discovery learning, I will come and visit your class, because anyone who always uses discovery learning, I don't know how you get through any material. I think that some discovery learning is good. I think guided instruction is good in discovery kinds of modes, but they're there. But I think it's the outcomes part. So I kind of get what you're saying, and there is a difference in some aspects to it. Like, for instance, there are times when students, you're sitting next in a small group, the group goes off in a tangent, and they're totally wrong. And then of research out there saying, does that actually help or hinder? If you practice something that's wrong, that's like coming up with a bad habit. Then you got to get rid of that bad habit. On the other hand, Bob Bjork does some great stuff with desirable difficulties, and his claim is if you don't have a hard time learning, you're not really learning. So it's really complicated, but I think it depends on the outcomes. Yeah?
I was going to try to take a stab at what I think is a universal principle for
Okay.
teaching, and I think it boils down to, in my limited experience, the motivation of the student. If you can motivate a student to want to learn the subject, if they see it as if it's a tool that's going to help them go forward,
Yes.
then I think you have the students working along with you in the learning process.
I totally get that. In fact, I've got a couple that I'm going to throw in there that I think are universal in that respect. For instance, attention, motivation. But then the question becomes is how do you motivate all students? So the motivation is the overarching, if you have it, that's great. But there's going to be so much variability in the class as what would motivate most classes may not motivate everybody in the class. However, yeah.
And I think that actually, in a university-like situation, actually that puts us all at a larger challenge. I think
It does.
motivation is a degree in a lot of cases, and
Yeah.
that isn't necessarily, a piece of paper doesn't necessarily do something for you, right?
Right. You mean for like the graduation?
Right.
Or is it, yeah. In fact, there was another one that I really liked was Alfie Kohn wrote a book on Punished by Rewards, which I really liked because one of the things he talked in there is he was really big on the Premack principles. Basically, you can use a less desirable thing, a more desirable thing to reinforce a less desirable thing. So something you want, but you want it more than something else, you can stack these things. But what happens by Alfie Kohn after a while is anything that's a barrier to get to something you want, like these more and less desirable things, whatever the barrier is becomes less and less desirable. It actually starts to lose desirability. So for instance, I could say if you want to go play at the park, you have to do the dishes first. You may actually not think doing the dishes is a big deal. When you're little, you might actually like it. But if I make it contingent that you have to do the dishes to go to the park, after a period of time, you will come to resent and dislike doing the dishes. My little girls love to do dishes. We do them together all the time. I loved it when my little one would put a whole dinner plate in and then lift it up. All down the front of her. My wife would come in. There's water all over the floor. I would lay towels out ahead of time. She loved it. I made the mistake when she was a little bit older of saying, let's do the dishes, then we'll go to the park. Oh, Dad, I want to go to the park. What I did was I stuck a really desirable thing out there, and I put another desirable thing, but a little bit less, in front of it. College, we've stuck the education in between the students walking through the door and going out and getting their jobs and living the life they would like to live. We may have created a system where we've taken kids who like to wash dishes and made it contingent on something else to the point that they like it less. So the motivation is a problem. But if we can motivate them, and I got to move on here, but if we can motivate them universally, if people are motivated, they do better. Scott Freeman wrote a meta-analysis that did show that if we add active engaged learning to our classes, that everybody does better. But in this article, and by the way, I have chatted with Scott Freeman. In fact, I was one of the times I went to the Gates Foundation, I have to point this out because I actually did a presentation. At the end of the presentation, I told you what I'm about to tell you, and this is to kind of stave off somebody saying, I don't know if he would say that. He was in the audience, but I didn't know it. So the one person said, well, that was very provocative, Todd. Scott, what do you think? I went, wow, I didn't know he was sitting there. This paper's been downloaded 250,000 times now. Everyone's talking about it. It's really cool. He did about 250 studies. He looked at active learning versus lecturing. What he found very consistently was all lecture all the time, decreased learning outcomes. Nobody is able to lecture all the time and have better outcomes than when you mix some activity with it. How does this get problematic? I like Eric, by the way, I got to turn this off or else, multitasking, you won't listen to me, you'll read. Eric Mazur is a phenomenal educator who has done some amazing things, but I think he's a little too smart because I think he read Scott Freeman's article and said, this is a really important article. The impression I get is almost unethical to be lecturing if you have this data. I think what he meant was it's unethical to be lecturing all the time. But he didn't use those words. He used the words to lecture. Other people picked up this and some other things, and there's been some presidential commissions. I have now read in 4 different places, unethical to lecture. So when you walk out of here today, what I'm hopeful, if nothing else, is you say, wait a minute, I think there's a misinterpretation of this. How bad can it get? Oh, by the way, I had to put this in here. Here's Eric Mazur. Eric does amazing stuff. Pure concept test. What he does is, physics class, he'll lecture for 15 minutes, then he'll do a conceptual question. He'll ask people, here's multiple choice, A, B, C, D. How many think it's A? The correct answer. How many A's? How many B's? How many C's? How many D's? If he sees that about 60, 70% of the people get it right, say, turn to your neighbor and convince your neighbor of your answer. 60 seconds. Then he'll come back and say, now, how many A's, B's, C's, and D's? If almost everybody gets it right, he moves on, and if he doesn't, he reteaches it. What he found by collecting data is in 60 seconds, students explain it to each other. Then they move on. His overall outcomes have gone way up. 15-minute lecture, multiple choice question, turn to your neighbor, talk about it. 15-minute lecture, multiple choice question, turn to your neighbor and talk about it. Ooh, class is over. His knowledge, the student's knowledge on concept tests went way up. So the point is there was a way of adding it. People who say, well, I don't have time to add active learning, what he did was he added it for 2 minutes a class period. Now, maybe 4 if you actually talked about it a little bit. So it doesn't take a lot. And here he is lecturing about how effective the strategy is. Underneath where it says unethical to lecture. You see where that's funny? But the point is that he meant continuous lecture all the time, not quick lectures. How bad does it really get? This was on NPR. Of course we should say goodbye to lectures. They're unethical. So if everybody's hating on the lecture, we have to be careful at the concept. So I've spent quite a bit of time on this piece, again, trying to use a strategy that would keep you awake, But the concept is we have to be careful going down there. So maybe instead we should do group work. Everybody's talking about how fabulous group work is, but you know, I saw this, which I thought was really good data. And then I found this. And here's the issue. That shouldn't be funny. That should it should just not only be not funny, it should be puzzling. What do you mean? My group people don't let you down. Why is this funny? The fact is that if we're structure activities, they're not good either. When I say they're not good either, neither is a continuous lecture, neither is a bad lecture. So the point here is, and I've spent quite a bit of time, we've talked about some other things, I think we got to get rid of the active learning lecturing and start looking at some foundational concepts. And I'm just going to tell you this quickly, is that I've been playing around with this. This was a Developing Effective Lectures, was in Lessons Learned in Psychology. It's the American Psychological Society. This was from March of 98. 98, 08, 18, yep, just hit the 20th anniversary of me saying to people, hey, we shouldn't be hating on the lecture. And in fact, when I told Barry Perlman, he called me and said, I'd like you to do an article for the American Psychological Society Observer. And I said, cool, can I do it on effective lecturing? And he says, no, we're moving to active learning. People are moving away from lectures. They're going to be gone soon. Never asked them to operationally define soon. Then this one is that book right there, but this other book, and the only reason I'm showing you this, and you've got a copy of this someplace, Richard? Okay, good. So you just borrow it from Richard, don't buy it. Not trying to sell books here. 101 Intentionally Designed Strategies or Activities to Put Students on the Path to Success. This is a book all about active learning, engaged learning. This is a book that's all about lecturing and adding active stuff to it. The point is, I'm not standing up here saying one strategy is bad and one strategy is good. They're strategies. That's all they are. In fact, lectures. Here's one for you. When somebody says, you know, lecture's not effective, ask them which kind. I love to watch people's faces. You know, students can't learn from lectures. Say, which kind? They say, well, you know, lectures. Yeah, what kind of lectures? Do you mean, and you don't have to have these memorized, but the concept is, do you mean a formal lecture, Socratic, semi-formal, lecture discussion, expository, storytelling, point by point, lecture demonstration, problem solving, naked lecture? Wait a minute. Ain't nobody getting naked. This is Jose Bowen's naked lecture, taking away technology-free lectures. Chalk talks, multimedia, video. I mean, these are 12 different types. When it comes to active learning, I mean, storytelling, seriously? Storytelling lecture, I mean, it shouldn't have said gone to active learning. Storytelling modality is one of the best historical ways of conveying knowledge there is. Somebody's going to tell you that storytelling can't convey information? So I don't get that. What about engaged? Whew. We gave away that book, didn't we? Yeah, good. I'm out of the books. So good. So here's the deal. Just real quickly here, let's try this one. What kinds of engaged strategies are there? So anybody got some engaged strategies? Raise your hand so I can call you so we're not all yelling at the same time. Yes?
Think, pair, share.
A think, pair, share. Good.
Clickers.
Clickers, using clickers in the classroom.
Deliberate practice.
Deliberate practice, so we have them practicing something. You're all the way up to 3. You got 98 to go. Yes?
Debate.
A debate's a good one.
Well, I don't know if it falls in this, but I have students oftentimes take material and summarize it with drawing.
Oh, excellent. So they actually draw it. Yes, good.
Like Jeopardy.
Playing Jeopardy, so playing games, all kinds of gaming in the classroom.
Free writing response.
Oh, a free writing response is a good one.
Peer editing.
Peer editing is good. Let's just get up to like 15. We got a total of 7 more to go. Peer editing is a good one. 7 more types of active engaged learning strategies. Role playing is good. Note-taking pairs. We pair people up, take notes, and share with each other. Excellent. So we can take something where we do direct applications. Who got the book over here? What'd you get the book for? Wait, you won the book. Remember what the phrase was up here? Oh, yay, buzz groups. I almost took that back. So buzz groups is one. Brainstorming, by the way, buzz groups is basically just putting people in groups of 4 or 5 and having them talk about a topic. So brainstorming is good. 2 more and we're done. The which? Projects. Yeah, having a group project. That's a good one. Yes?
Reciprocal teaching.
Oh, reciprocal teaching. Kind of teach backs. Yep, good. So you came up with 15 pretty quickly right there. And again, the thing I'm really after here is when somebody says active learning is more effective than lecturing, now we're going to step into a whole new realm and say which kind of active learning is better than which kind of lecturing. See, that's the key here. Sorry, I was going to do a trigger warning, but I missed it. I just wrote a blog on trigger warnings, by the way. I want to make sure I said that snidely, and I didn't mean to. I think trigger warnings are actually a phenomenally good idea. We put them in the major motion picture industry. We put them on CDs. There's a way of doing trigger warnings without dispelling or ruining any classroom experience. But that's a whole other thing over there. Well, I was going to do something else, but we'll beat to it in a minute. Here's the data I wanted to hit first, though. And yeah, this is a tricky one. This is Richard Hake did this. Notice the date. You'll see a lot of stuff coming out of the mid-90s. That's when we were really going to take care of getting rid of lecture all to begin with and get it into the active learning. Here's what he did. The entire class took a pre-test, and this is concept tests, so you'll know it's there. These are normalized scores. The whole class took a pre-test and then a post-test. So this isn't one student, that's a class. The pre-test down here, if the class scores an 80 on the pre-test, then over here is the gain, which is the post-test minus the pre-test. So if the post-test is 100 points, pre-test is 80, be a 20-point gain. So this line right here would be as high up as you can go. So higher is better. What he looked at was interactive engagement from high school, colleges, and universities. That's any class that involved the students. We have had what Richard Hake would call an interactive engagement class because I've asked you some questions. You did a quick pair share. We've done some other stuff. You've interacted. Traditional lecture. Those would be me coming in and I did 2 hours of standing by the podium and saying, and in 1995, Bar and Tag wrote the book called this, and then in the year 2000, this happened, and I would do that for 2 hours. And with this heat, it would have been very relaxing. So we didn't go that route, though. What he found, which is pretty fascinating, is that none of the peer all-time lecturers are up in here. Even really, really good ones. And probably the best thing I could tell you today is that I can't find any data for a person who lectures all the time to outperform for a class people who integrate active engaged stuff periodically. I'm going to tell you in a second of why I think we should do that. But the point is, peer lectures are down here. The other thing that Richard wanted me to make sure to get across is if you're doing peer lectures, you could do crappy group work and you break even. Not the message? Okay, don't. That last one was a joke. Although actually it would hold up, but don't do it. The concept down here, peer lecture, up here is interactive. Here's the big thing for today. How many of you have ever seen this graph before? Anybody in here ever seen this graph before? Okay, only a couple of you have. I first saw the graph almost 20 years ago, 15 years ago or so. It was pretty much when it first came out. I misinterpreted this graph. I thought this graph meant that interactive engagement was better than lecturing. That's not what this says at all. You see, let's change the variables for a minute and just call them something else. Remember, traditional was lecturing all the time. Interactive engagement was doing both lectures with activities. If we were in a hospital and I said, this is exercise with watching your nutrition really carefully. Eating well and exercising, this is always exercising. Then we would come down here and say, look at this, exercising here, eating well and exercise is up here. We should stop exercising and eat well. Nope. What it says is the two things together is better than one by itself. The reason I put this up there is because I still to this very day will have people who will show that as a reason why we should get rid of lectures. So we have to be careful with that one. So these things, and all I'm going to do is blow right past these. You'll hear about flipped classrooms, problem-based learning, team-based, POGL, scale-up, everything. I think it's time we stop. This is the big thing for today. I think we stop worrying so much about active learning, lecturing, engaged learning. Those are concepts. But I think we have to figure out why. Why do some things work better than others? So let's try this real quickly. And I've been talking too much now. So I'm just another one that's really fast. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes, like 2 minutes. You talk to a neighbor here. But here's what I'd like you to do for just 2 minutes. Practice something that we've been playing around with. Small group discussion. A small group discussion is I'm going to have you break up into buzz groups of 4, maybe 5. I'm going to give you a focused topic, and you're going to talk about whatever this topic is or solve a problem. Actually, a discussion. It's not a problem solving. You're going to talk about this topic for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to summarize it, what we've just gotten through. Discussion lecture. I'm going to lecture over the topic, but while I'm lecturing, I'm going to ask people some periodic questions. So what do you think about this, and what do you think about this? Socratic would be different. A Socratic lecture would be drilling down with a single person, working through the thought process, as opposed to a discussion where I'm just going to get some discussions going. A lecture demonstration would be different. A lecture demonstration is when I would lecture about something and show you how it works. You see, there's about 12 different types of lectures. But for this lecture discussion and a small group discussion, one situation when it might work better to do a small group discussion than a lecture, and one situation where it might be better to not do it. So I've worded this kind of weird, but it's basically when is one better than the other, and when would one be worse than the other? Under what situations for a classroom? All right, so just take like a minute and a half, I guess we can do it. Chat with somebody and figure out when does it work well and when does it work not so well. All right, let's see what you came up with. All right. Issue number 1. Does that feel like it woke you up just a little bit? For lots of people, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm moving again. Again, physiologically, things happen when it's turn to your neighbor and talk. If I said stand up and talk, you know, we talk about think, pair, shares. You can standing, think, pair, shares, walking, think, pair, shares. On a day like today, there are times when I'd say, okay, you got 15 minutes, pair up with one other person, and take off and go for a walk. And set your cell phone, everybody has cell phones now, set your cell phones, everybody do it right now, set your cell phones for 15 minutes and go walking and I'll see you back. But make sure you come back in the 15 minutes. Class is going to pick up exactly at that time. You know the number one problem I have in doing this? No, they got their phones. They all have phones. No, they could take the phone with them as they set the timer on there. My biggest issue is the what? They go and leave and don't come back. That's not my big issue. My big issue is to get them out. They'll go out the door and sit down on the couch right outside the door. So I'll go out there and say, no, you must leave. Leave this area. And then they'll go sit at the end of the hall. And I'll walk down there and say, get out of the building. It's a 2-hour class. It's a day like today. Go. And so then they'll start wandering around. Now, if it's really, really hot, we can't do it. But the point is sometimes it's walking down the hallway, but it's moving around. Makes a big difference. So that's the big thing. All right, so real quickly, we've got other stuff we got to get to, but I wanted to try this quickly. What's one situation where the small group discussion would work really well? Yes?
We were talking about maybe if there's a controversial topic where people didn't feel comfortable sharing it.
Excellent. So that's one good one. That's a really good one. If you've got a controversial topic, students want to share and get their ideas out there. They don't want to do it in front of the whole group, but if I lecture about the whole thing, you never get your views out. So it's a great time to share your idea under a small scenario. That's really good. All right. When might it not work well? Yes?
When there's not parity in background knowledge.
Excellent. So if you've got disparity in background knowledge, by the way, have you heard the concepts where if you break people into groups 4 and you stratify them so you get really, really smart person in there who knows it really well and someone who's struggling? If you do that, you know one thing you find out real quickly is this person's not thrilled. And the disparity within the group can actually cause some problems. And I'm not saying to do it or not to do it. It's one of those things. Check with somebody, think it through, figure out what you're doing. Because otherwise you can run really quickly into a situation where this person resents what's going on and this person feels like an idiot. So you just have to do it carefully. But if you don't structure it well, it doesn't work well. All right, lecture discussion. When might a lecture discussion be a better strategy than a group discussion even? When do we like lecture discussions? Yeah, it'll happen. Yes, sir.
When there's an answer that you're trying to lead them to, and you want them to make suggestions and then sort of guide the class thinking.
Excellent. You know, one of the things that students, thank you for doing this. This is perfect. One of the things that students really do like to see at times is how you think. As an expert, this is how I think about the topic. I've kind of done it today. One of the things you did get from me today was how I've thought about active learning versus lecturing. I could have started out by saying, okay, everybody, think about this for a second. I had 2 hours. I could very easily have said, we're going to start out with you working together in groups for about 20 minutes. And for about 20 minutes, what I'd like you to do is think about active learning versus lecturing and how you perceive it. And I could have had you do that. And then you could have reported out. That would have taken 10 minutes. A half an hour in, I would have said, okay, well, thank you for all the contribution. And here's how I see it. I don't think that would be a good use of a half an hour. So if I know where I want to go to and I want you to think a certain way, a discussion with a lecture based with some discussion works really well. If it's really very specific in how I'm doing it, which is what my daughter was talking about with her teacher, I might want a 15-minute peer, a peer formal lecture almost, where I'm basically just explaining it to you and there's no discussion. So the point is I'm picking different strategies based on what I'm after. And when might it not work well? When might a lecture discussion not really work very well? That's a tougher one. Yes, sir.
Say you have an assessment that you're trying to help prepare them for, and if your lecture discussion is not aligned with that assessment.
Yeah. Well, that could do it. Yeah, that's really good. Or if we're short on time. There are times when I just need to get a chunk of material through, and so a lecture discussion may not work better. A lecture might be better. Or there's other times when a lecture discussion is not going to work as well as a small group. So yes?
I think also you have to think about the physical room that you're in and the number of students.
Yes.
So I had a classroom one time, it's a room up in the business school, where there's sort of a balcony.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
That's hard. Because if you dangle them over the balcony, that doesn't work.
And the balcony was constantly disengaged.
Yes, and that's another thing too, is when you have the separation. There's so many different directions we can go on these things. There are many things that make teaching difficult. One of them is the heterogeneity of the background. I forgot to tell you before I was going to mention this. I was on a graduate selection committee one time for a Ph.D. program in IO psychology. A letter writer wrote in a recommendation letter, if you call it a recommendation letter, if you would like to increase the intellectual diversity of your graduate program, I highly recommend this candidate. Oh yeah, that's how I felt about it too. I did not want to increase the intellectual diversity of my graduate program. I liked homogeneity. I wanted all really smart people. That's what I'm after. A whole bunch of really good people, not people who are really good and really awful. Imagine a minute if you owned a business. If you have a successful business, if you want to increase the diversity of the commitment of your employees, I highly recommend this person. I don't want a diversity of commitment. So the point there is that there's times when I need to get through something carefully, but there's other times when the small group, as you already mentioned, is going to work better than a lecture. Especially if you've been lecturing for a long time. Sometimes breaking it up so they can do something with it can work. So the point here is, much like all tools that are out there, you build a toolbox when you know different strategies. So when you get to a spot where you think on the fly when you're teaching, you think, oh, you know what, they're looking a little lethargic. I think I'm going to throw in a quick think, pair, share. In fact, I'll probably do a write, pair, share versus a think, pair, share because I want to have them take the notes and use those notes later in the class to form small buzz groups. Okay, everybody, we're going to do a write, pair, share. Now, for those of you who say, well, you can't possibly do that while you're teaching, it depends on how long you've been teaching and how long you've been practicing these things. Because much like tying your shoes, it's difficult when you start, and then as you do it more and more and more, it just becomes easier and easier. So there's times when we can change these things up on the fly. I like to throw in there real quickly that, so I think it was Shirley MacLaine. There's a quote. I love different quotes from movies. She said, I don't put people into boxes. I just label them. That was a fascinating quote. It made me think for a long time after that. I'm not the one to put them into the boxes. Society puts them in the boxes. Then I label the box and you tell me I'm the bad person. I still think that's a bad thing, but it really made me think. But the point is, we do have to have boxes. People who say you shouldn't label stuff, you shouldn't assume everybody, you never make an assumption because it makes an ass out of you and me. Ever hear that one? As you can already see, I fight with everybody around me. I had a colleague next door, this comes back to the boxes, she had a sign on her door that said, never assume, makes an ass out of you and me. And I showed up and one day I said, Rosemary, I tell you what, I said, if you can go 60 seconds without making an assumption, I will give you a $100 bill. And if you can't go 60 seconds without making an assumption, you take that stupid sign down. And she says, why would I take that sign down? It's true. And I said, oh, if you can make it 60 seconds. And she says, okay, you're on. I said, all right. Go.
I don't know your watch is right.
No, there's number one. How do you even know I'm looking at a watch? But I waited for 50 seconds. I said, hey, how you getting home? She said, driving. Why? I said, is your car still out there? What I did right there. She's assuming her car's out there. And then she's assuming that when she gets in her car that if she turns the key, it's going to start. And then she's assuming that if it starts and she puts it into gear, it's going to go. And then she's assuming if she's going and she steps on that pedal, it's going to stop. Which a friend of mine stepped on the brake pedal one time. The brake cable broke. That is a weird, violated assumption for a person going down the road. The point is that we're making assumptions all the time. We have to convey information. If you go to the doctor and you say, I think I have a cold, you've used a box. You say, this is a first-generation college student, we've used a box. It helps us to convey lots and lots of information, but what I'm going to say for today is I think that's valuable in a global sense, and then we should never forget to look in the box. Because the thing I had in here was getting introverts to talk in the classroom. I had a person call me one time and says, we'd like to do a video. Could you do a video of how to get introverts to talk in the classroom? I said, sure. Do you want me to do the whole series? And number 2, do you want them to talk? I'm fearful once they start, they won't stop. Now, there's a whole other side to this. The concept is, if the box basically is this, we've got students who don't talk in the classroom, right? We all do. And then if we say, how am I going to get my introverts to talk in the classroom? You've made an assumption that that's an introvert. Watch this. This is kind of cool too. What are 10 different type of people who might not talk in your classroom? Number 1 is an introvert. Who else is there? Yes?
English second language.
Yeah, ESL, English second language person.
Someone who's bored.
Someone who's bored may not talk because they just don't feel it.
People who learn better by processing longer.
Yeah, I just need some time to process. That's why I'm not...
Who's having a family emergency.
You know what? Any kind of an emergency outside, I've got stuff that my brain's thinking about because it's really important right now. A speech impediment. I'm really afraid that if I start talking, somebody's going to make fun of me. Ooh, 4 more.
Afraid of making mistakes.
Yeah, fear of failure, fear of making mistakes. There are certain individuals that do not want to look wrong in front of other people.
Mine's kind of related to that, but something we just did do the reading.
Yeah, they're not prepared. I think one of the sometimes you just don't want people talking. And if they don't know what they're doing, it's not a bad thing. All right, the reading. 2 to go. We're almost there. Prior experience, right? They've been ostracized in the past. And so now they're fearful if they do say something, they may be ostracized again here. I had a physics professor who used to say, that's a real lettuce head question. After a very short period of time, nobody was talking. And just need one more, 2 more than that. Let's do one more, yes. Yeah, if they disagree, they may not want to talk because there may be lots of reasons of not even starting down that road. And then we also have people from different cultures. We got all kinds of different experiences. We got lots of reasons. And the reason I point this up real quickly, yes, sir.
What you just did, I just had a question about it. You said that you wanted 10 answers.
Yep.
After 4 or 5, I'd had enough.
Yes.
And yet you'd already committed to 10, and it kept going. And the answers are getting worse and worse, sorry.
No, I thought the last answers were good.
You set yourself up, or you removed the control from the situation, and then you said, we're going to stay here until we get 10.
Right.
If you just would have said, let's go,
Yep.
then you would have had control. You could have said, thank you, let's go.
Okay, so here's. I'm glad you point that out because I didn't want to make the point there. I did start with 10. I thought we could get to 10 pretty quickly, and if I helped out, we could. Actually, and it's totally, by the way, I don't get offended by stuff. I'm all good with that. I didn't think it drug on too long. You did, that's okay. This is different perspectives of where we are in different things. I'm not going to even ask. I was tempted to say, well, let's vote on this, but I don't want to feel like it's a one versus the other. But the issue is, it kind of moved along, but the nice thing was you did know when this painful thing was going to end. You knew when we got to 10 we'd be done. A lot of times there are faculty members who will say, what do you think? Oh, that's a good one. Anybody else? Oh, that's a good one. Anybody else? That, I argue, is even more painful. At least you saw the ending coming. The other thing it did is I'll bet you anything that if I hadn't done that, if I said, what are the answers? We did get to 4 pretty quickly, and then there was a pause. I think if I just had said, what are some things, we would have been done at 4. And the others actually were pretty good, including the thing like number 9, which is ostracized. If you've got a student who has been picked on by somebody else, they are not introverted, they are not shy, they're not disengaged, they are scared. I had a faculty member in education at one place that I worked, and he came and talked to me once. He says, Todd, I don't know how students are driving me crazy. He says, how do you get students to stay on task? And I said, well, give me an example. He said, just the other day, I was trying to get the students to respond just like every other day. They're like bumps on the log. They don't want to do a damn thing. They're just sitting there staring at me, and I can't get them to do anything. Pardon the language for just a second. This is exactly what he was telling me. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, then there's this one student that says, well, you know, this does remind me of something I learned in abnormal psych. And I told her, I said, passing this class, why are you thinking about abnormal psych? You should be thinking about this class. I said, well, how's the student responses been going lately? He said, well, nobody will respond these days. No one's responding. And I said, do you think it has anything to do with that comment you made to the young lady? He said, well, I don't know why it would. She was wrong. And so the point there is that was a really good response. I like that response. So I was going to point out that that's a really heartfelt one for me, and it was number 9. We never would have got there. But I absolutely agree with you. I do something like sometimes, before I said, let's get to 15, that one I called the audible on myself. I was just counting, and I said, we were up to like 8, and I said, let's see if we can get to 15. So that's a different way of going. But let the students know where you're headed. Again, it's a goal. We want to get to a certain point, but that's a good point. All right. So it's not just getting introverts to talk in the classroom. If we just think the students who don't talk are introverted, we have the danger of starting a box, that's where they are, and we don't know anything about them. First generation college students, here's one for you. First generation college students, right? They struggle in certain areas, they don't in other areas. By definition, neither of my parents have gone to college. I come to Berkeley, I'm a first generation college student, right? Neither of my parents go to college. My older brother went to, my older brother went to UNC-Chapel Hill. He's 3 years older than me. Am I still a first generation college student? Actually, by definition, I am. When I step through the door with my older brother at UNC from 3 years ago, and this person steps through the door, and that individual, 2 parents, no other siblings, first generation college student, we've got data on this. They are totally different human beings. It's okay to call them first-generation college students, but if we say, oh, you're in that box, we need to look in that box. Here's one other one, by the way, because we just dealt with these kinds of issues. We were just looking through, how do you define this? A mom and a dad get divorced. Neither of them have gone to college, but there's an uncle who lives across the street who is very, very related to the family and doing all kinds of things, and he's got a master's degree. Am I still a first-generation college student because my uncle has a master's degree, but neither of my parents do? And yet all the way through the application process and everything else, my uncle's saying, oh, you don't want to do this, you want to do this. We have all kinds of influences. What if it's the guy across the street or the woman next door who's right there with the family all the time? So when we look in these boxes, we got to find out what's there. And the same thing happens in classes. And again, this is the ranting and raving for the whole class period. When somebody says lecture doesn't work, that's a box. Let's look inside of it. Oh, yeah, sorry.
On the question about strategies,
Yeah.
I always, when I bring this up with the graduate students in the pedagogy class, and then I always go back and after we go through the whole exercise, go back and point out that everybody talked.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a really good point, and I'm glad you said that. There's so many different directions, and I'm glad when you do these things. When I'm lecturing, like right now, there's one voice in the classroom. There's about 40 people here. If I put into groups of 5, there's about 8 people talking at any given point, because each one of your groups is going to have a person talking. If I do groups of 3, now I'm closer to 13 people talking. Up to like 20 people talking. So I can get more people talking, and it varies. So that's a really good point. How big should the group be? Here's my just really, really general rule for my life. I want to be the smallest group possible to still be able to have a good conversation. If I do a pair share on a difficult concept, and I'm paired up with you, and I say, I don't have a clue, and you say, neither do I. Say, What are you going to do this weekend? And suddenly we start talking about something else. If it had been a group of 3, it might have been that the third person says, well, I think what he means is, and then we'd have a conversation. Sometimes I'll do groups of 8 because it's a really tough thing, and I'll say, okay, there's 24 people in here, get into 3 groups of 8, here's the problems, work through them. I don't do it very often, but if it's really tough, smallest group possible and still solve the issue or address the issue. Yep, huge. Laptop bans are big right now. Should we ban laptops? And all I'm going to do is skate right past this one. I say absolutely ban the laptops. If they're banning the laptops, what's going to bring about the best outcome? And I say absolutely never ban laptops if it doesn't bring about the best outcome possible. There was a radio show they did with Bonnie, teaching in higher education. I remember the name of that thing. Richard, do you remember the name of that thing? Something like that, but I did it, and if you email Richard, he'll get it from you. But I just did a show on banning laptops, and one of the quotes she pulled out of there from when I talked to her says, if you're banning laptops because they're distracting, because the students basically are doing laptops instead of paying attention to you, when you ban the laptops, what you're doing is providing them something else to not think about with respect to you. Think about something else. Banning the laptops doesn't force them to concentrate on you, it just gets them off the laptops. Now sometimes we do want to ban the laptops because we want to have a good conversation, we want to talk things through, we don't want the laptop distraction in there. But you can't make me pay attention to you by telling me to turn off my technology. Because I'll tell you right now, if you're boring and I don't care, I'm going to think about bacon. Because I like bacon. I don't like that thick Canadian bacon stuff that the Europeans call bacon. I like the thin, really crispy bacon. I like it on the BLT with farm-raised tomatoes and fresh lettuce and fresh ground pepper. Ooh, multi-grain bread. Next 10 minutes, half of you are checked out. So the point here is we got to be careful when we say we're going to ban something or not ban something. It's what we've gone after. 31 years I've been playing around and teaching this stuff, and here's what I've learned. That this is what you get when you go to Google and type in complicated view of cognitive learning. That's all. No, here's what I wanted. I want to be careful because all I care about is this. I was looking at this one day and I thought, this is fascinating. And those of you in pedagogy and cognitive psych in different areas, there's nothing wrong with this. It's pretty straightforward. If you're not from the areas, it looks like a lot of information, which is what happens when I take your class. Things look complicated, so I needed a simplified view out there. And so as I'm looking through this, thinking about what's really going on here, it suddenly occurred to me that everything kind of flows through this. So I started playing around and reading a little bit more of Sweller's work with cognitive load theory. So in the last few minutes, here's what I want to do. I want to get rid of one other big notion, is that we should do active learning because it breaks up the class. I think that's a terrible phrase. Because it makes it feel like the lecture is important and the activities, the fluff and stuff. And if I've got a lot to cover, I need to dump or not do the activities because I don't have time for that. I need to do the important stuff. But what if the lecture is not the important stuff? What if it's not even flipped around? What if they work together? And so I started playing around with that, and it occurred to me these couple things here. And I've run this past several cognitive people, some neuroscience people. If anybody in the room in here says totally I don't buy it, please tell me. I've been playing with this about a year. Here's what I believe in these. Number one, if you do not have a human being's attention, there is no possibility for learning. Attention is an absolutely, not even critical, it's a foundational piece that must be there. If I'm walking along the street and somebody 20 feet behind me trips over a loose piece of concrete and falls down, and I don't hear them, I don't see them, I don't smell them, I don't taste them, I don't touch them, there's no sensory process that goes on, there's no way I could have learned anything about that loose piece of concrete. If I was in the other direction and watching that person fall over the concrete, then as I approach the concrete, I might pay attention. Or even better, what if it's one of those grates on the walk and the person disappears and falls through it? There's very few people that say, wow, that's weird, and then walk right over the grate. Right? In fact, you may never walk over a grate again the rest of your life. So the point is, I had to attend to it in order for learning to happen. I think anytime we've lost our students' attention, you've lost them. If they start texting on their phone, they can't learn at that moment. If their brain starts thinking about bacon, they're gone. So attention has to be there. Another one, not as critical, and they are all related, but another important one is there has to be some understanding. If I don't understand what's happening, then that becomes difficult. Let me try this real quickly. I'm going to see if I'm going to totally mess everything up here. I'm going to try this video.
A number of years now, work has been proceeding in order to bring perfection to the crudely conceived idea of a transmission that would not only supply inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal grammeters. Such an instrument is the turboencabulator. Now basically, the only new principle involved is that instead of power being generated by the relative motion of conductors and fluxes, it is produced by the modial interaction of magneto-reluctance and capacitive directance. The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panometric fam. The latter consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic marsal vanes so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented.
Now, here's the deal. Every one of you has sounded like that to somebody. There's no doubt about it. I took organic chemistry. That woman sounded like that every day I dropped the class. Now, the point there is, if I don't know what's going on, it makes it really hard. This pulls in that whole background, which we know so well, is prior knowledge. Prior knowledge is the best predictor of how quickly you will learn something new. If you can slide it into a schema that you already have, very quick. I mentioned at the very beginning, somebody at a party, you see their name or get introduced to them, you get their name, and you've got it just like that. It wasn't happenstance. You got it just like that because either you have they remind you of somebody before. So if you meet someone and say, wow, she looks just like Jan and her name is Janice, how weird is that? You've got it. You're just there. Or the other possibilities, there's a lot of value and interest. But something is happening that really draws your brain in. It just doesn't happen by happenstance again, as I was saying. So the concept here is you have to understand. If you don't understand it, it becomes really hard. And how many students do you have who are struggling with the material? And if you talk to them and say, what are you doing to study? And they'll say, oh, I've read the chapter 3 times. I've made flashcards, and you do this. Try this one. Ask them, what do you think about the material? When you think about the material, what do you think about? And if they look at you and say, and this happened to me all the time, especially when I was teaching cognitive, they'd look at me and say, yeah, the truth is I just don't get it. And my response always, every time was, especially, totally, if a student's got like a C and they tell you I don't get it, congratulate them. You know what? Good for you. There is no way you got a C if you don't understand what's happening in here unless you have worked your butt off. And if you watch 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you, it's nonstop. I read the chapter over and over again. I have my friends quiz me. I do everything I can. I said, I can tell, because the only way you could get a C on this test and not understand it is through really hardcore brute force. Point is, it's really hard to get there, and they're not going to be successful in the long run. I'll also tell them it's only a number of days before you just totally don't make it in here, because there will come a spot where you can't not have prior knowledge. You can't be a physician doing a surgery and have no prior knowledge. And I don't mean like not done that surgery before, like no prior. That'd be like me operating on your appendix. Totally bad idea. So the concept here is we need some prior knowledge. We need some understanding of what's going on. And there has to be some value. So why do groups work so well at times? I can lecture for a while, but after I lecture for a while, if I have lost your attention, I've lost you. If I'm an expert in the field and I have now kind of gone past where you are, kind of like the guy in the video, I've lost you by understanding. And if you don't see the value of what's going on for what I'm doing, I've lost you there. If I have you get into small groups and you turn to your friends and say, whew, I don't get any of this. And someone in the group says, oh, you know, this is like what we learned last week. It's like this. You say, oh, I never thought about it like that. The small group just helped pull the person back in for understanding. When you say turn to your neighbor and work on this thing and they put their phone away or they quit thinking about bacon and they turn and start talking, you got their attention back. So now the group isn't something that just kind of fills in or takes away boredom. It actually helps them for value, for understanding, and for attention. So it really, really helps. Now, I mentioned cognitive load real quickly. This has been around since the 80s. It's just been making a resurgence just recently. And here's the idea. Let's just try this like visually, because let's just try this visually for a minute. I almost said you're visual learners, and then I have to talk about the whole thing about no data behind meshing and the fact that we don't really know that. So let's just keep moving. But if you're really interested in learning styles, talk to Richard. And he'll help you out. He's got a whole team of people that'll help you there. But let's do a visual representation, which is different from being a visual learner. Whew. If this is how much you can kind of process at any given time, you have all felt at some point in your life where you were doing something and someone asked you a question and you said, not now. Or you start to read an article and you think, whew, not today, not right now. Or you get up in the morning and you start to do something, you think, I can't do this right now. That's because you've lost you've filled up. If you've got space, you've got capacity and working memory, you can process stuff. There comes a point when it chokes it off and you can't do anymore. We can think of this as cognitive load. There is intrinsic load. Intrinsic load will take a little bit of this. This is just the difficulty of what you're doing. If you're putting together an IKEA bookcase, it's going to take a... No, it'd go the other way. No, you start with this. This is what you got working. If for some of you, IKEA bookcase is like, we're done. In fact, here's a good example. So you start to put together the IKEA bookcase. You lay everything out. You think, okay, and you just stare at it like this and start drooling a little bit. And right about then, a significant other comes in and says, hey, I was thinking about spring break. I was thinking about a vacation going to the Pacific Northwest. And you say, not now. And the not now is because you're full. There's also this extraneous load. Extraneous load are things like conversations that can happen and side things, just things that are out there. If you've ever been reading a book or really intently trying to read a book and somebody starts a conversation 20 feet away, 10 feet away, and you think, please, and you're kind of frustrated with them, you might even move over a little bit and then they're still talking loud and you move away, and the idea is this extraneous load is burning up some of your capacity. You might also be reading a novel, a matter of fact, you're rereading a novel by the pool, conversations all around you. But you see, in that case, there's no intrinsic load. So now the extraneous load might be a little distracting, but you're still moving. Then there's germane load. Now, germane's kind of cool too. And what's happening here is, as you do stuff more and more, you actually get more and more efficient at it. So you actually can increase your load by, putting shoes was hard at one point, I got easier at it. So now as I do something over and over again. This is why basic foundational things in your classes. I tell students, classical conditioning. You have to be very good about saying to me, hey, Dr. Z, I was looking at something. I think this is unconditioned stimulus, conditioned stimulus. This is spontaneous recovery. This is a inhibitory stimulus. This is an excitatory stimulus. These basic foundational things, you have to have them just like this. Because when you do, it doesn't create any load. Who the first president, who was the first president of, I'm at my home campus. Anybody happen to know UNC-Chapel Hill? I'm the first president of Berkeley. Whose name came to mind when I started to ask the question? George Washington. Yeah, how many of you thought George Washington? Because I said, who's the first president? Washington. I said, let's try Chapel, I don't know. So the concept is, as soon as you hear first President Washington, you've got that down so well, it doesn't really burn any energy. So here's the real deal and why this is important, and it will summarize everything we're doing. If you've got that's why I love cognitive load. If you've got a certain amount of loads possible, imagine now that I'm teaching a difficult class and I'm lecturing. I'm going to, because of intrinsic load, people have a little side conversation, all this stuff going on. And this stuff is cumulative, because if I'm teaching you something and I keep moving on to the next task and the next task, it's more and more you're filling up, and you get to a spot where you say, I'm done. I can't process anymore. Have you ever walked out of a learning situation, a conference or something, exhausted? If you've walked out of a conference exhausted because of all that you learned, that's what your students feel like. You can walk out of a classroom saying, that was so exciting, because you don't have a lot of load, because it's all second nature to you. You just got it. They're trying to learn stuff. They're just like this. So after 10 minutes, I may have filled up the class. So you know what? It's because I'm an expert. I've given you high-level stuff. I'm going to stop, get into small groups. We're not getting into small groups right now because it's a break. We're doing it because cognitive load, you're full right now and you need to do something with that. So I give you an activity that's an application. I give you a demonstration. I do a teach back. Something where there's no new information, but you're doing something with it. Now imagine for a minute, back to that Hake grid that showed that nobody with the red dots were really high. Imagine I think, I've got to get through this material. I talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and get to the 15-minute mark and I keep talking. The processing stops for you. Your students can only go a certain period of time and then they're done based on their cognitive load. And this is why when people say, well, I would do the activities, but I got so much to cover, it's actually a flawed concept. Because them keeping talking isn't going to do more. Now, taking a deep breath here. All of our students are different, which means you're going to have some students who can hang in there for the whole class period and have no problem with it. You've got other people who are done at the 3-minute mark, and then you've got other people along the way. So you've got this distribution of kind of when off, and you have to make a decision what makes sense to stop at which spots. So that's the point there. So the cognitive load is a really, really important one. And if you watch for it, you'll see it all the time. You can be driving down a road and all of a sudden there's an accident, so the traffic gets really bunched up. You got people having a conversation in the back seat with the radio going, a fairly new driver, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, turn the radio off, everybody be quiet. Basically what they're trying to do is reduce the load enough that they can still process. We know people that all of a sudden just can't do anything. They just freeze. They've just maxed out. So I love this concept. I think it's good. So in the last couple of minutes, we have to get their attention. Just going to summarize doing this. I've tried to do all kinds of things to keep you in a very hot room, in an afternoon, after lunch, awake and somewhat engaged in this material. So I've tried to teach this in a way that I would normally teach. I've tried to do lots of different things to keep your attention. So that's just there. The brain is wired so that if you have constant stimuli, it will shut things down. You know the things like if you live next to the highway, after a while you don't hear the highway. Your friends come over and say, how can you live with that road noise? And you say, what? I didn't notice it. You can live next to the owl. It goes away. The brain will discount that constant stimuli. Look at all the variability I've been doing. I wander around like this. My voice is all over the place. My hands going all over the place. If I reduce all that variability, I drop more into a monotone voice. I stand perfectly still right here, and it only takes a couple of seconds before physiologically things start to change. Although we've just picked up some external on our cognitive load, I noticed, from upstairs. So the point here is that the variability actually is what helps. I already talked about that one. So what we want to think about all the time in your classes is where's the hook? I love to think about this one in my own classes. It's like, where do I start? Where do I somehow get people hooked in? In my class, how can I do that? And some of you are going to say, yeah, well, I teach really boring stuff and my students don't care. You should teach something else. That's the big problem we have. Yes? Yes.
And it just occurred to me that perhaps because they were seeing that in editorial, because I gave it to them.
Yeah, I mean, perfect. If you say, here's the main thing for today, what I like about that is please keep in mind, and this is get ranting and raving about these things, I think most students are really trying so hard. And I do know there's some students who don't care, but they are such a small minority that I don't even care. I'm letting them go. There's a couple that just... I run into students periodically that their parents are paying for everything. I find out that they have a massive trust fund. As soon as they get their degree, their whole life is going to be set. They're in class because the parents say, if you're not in class, we're going to basically cut you off financially. You know what? There's only so much I can do for that student. I do my best, but there's only so much I can do. Most of the students want to learn. So when they say things like, is this going to be on the test? You know what I used to think that meant? I used to think that meant, could you just spoon feed me and tell me what's going to be on the test so I can do well? You know what I think now? I think by and large that their cognitive load is such that when they're really maxed out, they're trying to figure out what is the most critical thing, and I'm going to learn that, but because I'm not an expert in the field, I don't know if the thing you just told me was an anecdote that was off to the side, or a critical piece of information that I need. And if it was supposed to illustrate a point for me, which means prior knowledge helps to solidify it, but I'm from a different culture and I don't know what you're talking about, you didn't give me any kind of anchoring, you just provided extraneous load. Because now I got to go learn about the Seinfelds so that I can then figure out why it's funny. So the point here is when you say, here's the main point of the day, you help them focus, you help them anchor it, and you give them that hook. This is what we're talking about today. So I love that. Oh, I think it's great. That's a puma. It's a very, very versatile cat. I was actually doing a presentation one time. Here's the one. I was walking. Constant information, devalued. If you're walking along and you see a tree, I love trees, I'm not disparaging trees. But if I walk along a path and I see the tree, once I glance at it, if it's not falling, if it's not windy or anything, I got about all the information I need. I could actually close my eyes, look at this, and I can walk, although I'm a little scared. There, whew, I made it. The point is, once I know it's there, it's a tree, no new information. I can ignore it and everything's cool. If instead I'm walking along and there's a puma there, I think, whoa, don't normally see a puma on campus. it's really unlikely that I'm going to walk by and say, huh, that's cool. They could like eat me. Or well, it's so interesting. But the point here is that I'm going to watch it, but I'm going to watch it mostly the same as I would a dog running around or a wild-looking squirrel that's sitting on a branch right over the sidewalk. Is if I look at something and say, I don't know what it's going to do. Again, hypothesis generation. I can't put the next move. Human brain is wired to go for the things that maybe implicate your life, and you can't predict the next move. So the point is, when you're teaching, I like to say teach like a puma, not like a tree. There you go. Down to 6 minutes here. I want to leave just a minute. I don't know if we'll make that part, but the understanding I've already mentioned. Prior knowledge is huge. Value and interest. There has to be some kind of value. If the students don't see value in it, it's so hard to learn. So it's our job to say, here's why it's important. And by the way, it's important because it's on a test is to the lowest level of value you can do before you just give up. Because if it's only important because it's going to be on a test, then really all I need to do is learn it well enough to get through the test, and I'm never going to need it again. And so the point is, I'm not really figuring out why it's important. So if we can help them and say, this is important because, and additional material, I tell students all the time, you will probably never need this piece of information in and of itself. But if you don't have this, there is no way that you're going to get the next piece, which is what you're going to need for that next piece. And that's the money shot over there in terms of the having the thing that you're going to have to explain that an employer is going to pay for. Or some agency is going to want you for this thing. That's what they pay money for, is the thing that's up there, but you can't get there without these steps. And students sometimes say, well, I just want to be there. I say, yep, me too, but this is what it takes. So the concept here is there has to be some value out there for people. The other one I was going to mention quickly too with that whole thing with the cognitive load is multitasking. You know, the concept, students think they're very good at multitasking these days. And what I love to tell students is, yes, of course you can multitask, just not the way you think you can. And if somebody tells you it's not possible to multitask, you can tell them something magical. Watch this. I've been practicing for years. I am multitasking at this moment. I am walking and talking at the same time. Now you might say, well, that doesn't really count as multitasking, but I beg to differ. These are two complex tasks. The reason I can multitask is because I haven't maxed out my cognitive. You see, I have been walking for so many years that I've gotten very good at it. And the talking does take a lot of cognitive load, but the walking doesn't. But it wasn't always that way. Do you know when you have a baby, little baby, taking their first magical step? And if you say, oh, what a big boy, what happens? They fall down. They fall down because you've maxed cognitive load. They can't listen to you and walk at the same time. And so the point here is, you get better and better at it. So I can multitask as long as I can reduce the cognitive load so much that I can still do this. What that basically means is I can have one cognitively demanding task, everything else has to be non-cognitive, non-demanding. You could never, ever turn speech into an automatic process like tying your shoes or walking because we never know what the next word out is. And because of that, it's always a cognitively complex thing. So I can't text and listen at the same time. That's why I tell students, you can't do those two things at the same time. You can do other things at the same time. You have to know the difference. Attention grabbers, the hook. This is the hook part. Something that draws people's attention. We don't have time for that. So now in our last couple of minutes, once we learn stuff, we have to keep it. This is just to learn it. We have to have attention and understanding and value. To learn things. Elaboration is tying it to other things. Help the students tie it to other things. A lecture can do that. So can small group activities. You tell them, get into small groups and come up with one good application. Get into small groups and come up with some way that this relates to your real life outside of campus. Get into it and figure out how this ties into the last chapter. You're asking them to elaborate. We have about 86 billion neurons and 10,000 connections on each one. We have so much capacity in there. And the idea is how you tie it together. And then the other part, it's called long-term potentiation. The more frequently you fire a neuronal pathway, the more likely it is to fire in the future. It becomes easier and easier to do something the more and more times you do it. So when students say, I did like 3 problems, why do I have to do more? You have to do them until they're just so easy they take no cognitive load. This is, you don't have to tell them. The idea is foundational stuff has to be really, really right there. They will tell you sometimes, why can't I look it up on the phone? I like to tell them this one. You know, I'm surprised you had to learn language. We could look up every word on the phone. All you'd have to do is figure out what words you want to use. Well, somehow we'd have to be able to get to the words, and then after we looked them up, we could use them. But it wouldn't let you actually process a sentence, would it? Because the sentence I'm saying right now can only be processed by every single word being automatically generating a concept for you. And that allows you to do very complicated sentences. It's required that you learned all those words. Now, you did it across a lifetime. And so I can say to my students, the concept that you understand when I say, I am the faculty member of this class, I appreciate you being here, and you know what that sentence means because you've learned all those words and then you overlearned a lot of those words. If you had to look up each one of those, you'll never be able to process the sentence. In this class, you will learn scaffolding, you're going to learn operant conditioning, and you're going to get those words down so well you can talk the language of the display. That's the path. The path doesn't go good places or bad places. It goes where it has been trodden on. My newest venture that I'm going to go out on right now is looking at how we help students to take care of themselves. You all know what it feels like when you wake up and you're exhausted. It's going to be a bad day. You know that for yourself. But yet we look at students who are exhausted all the time. Students don't get that either. And it's not a matter of I'm so exhausted I can't do anything or I feel great. It's somewhere on this scale. And so this NASA astronaut, on average, 34% increase in cognitive functioning, like hours later. By the way, learning as you go. You ever heard anybody say, I'm going to take a nap for an hour? This is what I find fascinating. Read a little bit about lengths of naps. If you look at sleep cycles, a 1-hour nap is a hideous idea. A 90-minute nap is a phenomenal idea, and a 20-minute nap is an acceptable idea. 1 hour, don't do it. If you ever say, or your students say, you know, I took a nap yesterday, I did take a nap, you say, you're really exhausted, you should take a nap. Oh, whenever I do, I wake up and I'm just day and I feel awful. Yeah, had an alarm. I know you had an alarm because that's how you would have woke up then. And if you set an alarm at the 60-minute mark, it puts you at the deepest cycle of the sleep, and you should wake up feeling exhausted. Go 90 minutes, you'll go all the way through the sleep cycle, and you'll come back out, and you'll wake up feeling great. Those are the types of things, little by little, we have people just do them, work at them. And things like exercising and good hydrate. We know that a 10% decrement in hydration leads to cognitive decrements. If a person has got a little bit of a cognitive decline, my father-in-law right now has some cognitive dementia. If it's 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, my wife's a nurse practitioner in a different city. If they call and say, hey, Dad's really confused today, you know the first question? What has he had to drink? How much water has he had today? Because if he goes all day without drinking water, in the evening, he's really confused. That's a cognitive decrement due to dehydration. And so that's what we have to watch out for. And the complex carbohydrates, eating good foods, very helpful. I don't know what an issue it is here at Berkeley, but one thing we're playing around with at Chapel Hill and a couple other places is the students who can't afford nutritious food. When we say things like it's really important to eat a nutritious meal, we're making an assumption that they can come up with the money to do that, and just being careful they can do that. Whew. We did start 10 minutes late, so I was off just a hair. So thank you. Oh, thank you. You're so nice. Appreciate you coming. I just really appreciate the opportunity to come and play around and spout about this stuff a little bit. And now, when somebody walks and says, you can't learn from passive learning, you say, well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Active learning is more effective than lecturing. Well, what kind of active learning, what kind of lecturing, what kind of situation? Students these days, they want to be spoon-fed. We probably want to look at the students and see. Some of them do, no doubt about that. Some of them don't. And how do we help them to be better? We just keep working at it. So keep trying. In an hour and 45 minutes, we can only get so much done. I hope this was worth your time. I really appreciate it. And go forth and do the good things. Oh, keep this quote for you. Teaching is the profession that makes all professions possible. So we want to keep moving along, at least at the median of all professions. We need to keep moving forward, keep figuring stuff out. But anyway, thank you for coming. Thank you.